Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Prosperous Nonprofit. I am really excited to have here with me today Haley Cooper. Haley, welcome.
Thank you so much, Stephanie. I am so excited to be here with you.
Thank you. Yes, we just chatted a couple weeks ago on your podcast, and now here we are chatting on mine, all about fundraising. So, tell me and tell our listeners a little bit about. Let's see. Let's start with what you do now.
Sure. So I am the CEO of the Savvy Fundraiser, and I always like to say I'm the CEO. It's kind of fun. I
Yes, yes.
also am the host of the Lead with Heart podcast, which Stephanie recorded a few weeks ago. And the Savvy Fundraiser really focuses on empowering emerging organizations. So you're like, what's an emerging organization? It's an organization that has been around for 10 plus years, has a budget over $500,000, and has 1 to 2 people in their organization, but they've never done individual giving. Maybe they focus on
Mm.
events, they focus on grants, but they're tired, they're burnt out, and they need a way to create more space for growth and innovation in their organization. So I help them build out their fundraising strategies, a comprehensive fundraising strategy tailored to their organization. And I go through a 4-part process to really dive deep into what that looks like. And it also includes collaboration and engagement among team members, because as they're starting out with their fundraising, it's new, and we have to empower the whole organization to be involved and have a sense of ownership with that fundraising strategy.
Amazing. Yeah, I love that, especially about the the buy-in piece. And I've definitely been on the finance side of things, and fundraising is kind of doing their thing, and we're not talking to each other, and that can be very bumpy. And I've also seen, I've seen that work really well. So I love that. How did you get here? What has your journey looked like to get you to the point where you founded the Savvy Fundraiser?
That's a great question. So I actually started in nonprofits straight out of college, although that wasn't what I thought my trajectory was going to be. I graduated with a degree from St. Mary's College of California with a degree in kinesiology. So I thought that I
Oh.
wanted to be a registered dietitian or exercise physiologist, and I was applying to school after school and got denial after denial. And right when I graduated college in 2011, went on my first missions trip to Malawi, Africa. And you're like, why Malawi? Literally had to Google it on a map to figure out where Malawi was. And
Yes.
I was just blown away, and like coming from Orange County out of my bubble into a country that I had never even heard of just changed my life for the better. And I always say, like, if you go on a missions trip, you get back after 2 weeks and you kind of you have a fire in you, but you get back into what your daily life was. And about 6 months after that trip, the leader who had led that missions trip called me and he said, Haley, do you want to go make peanut butter in Malawi for a year? And I was like, sure, let's go. And he's like, Haley, go home and pray on it. And I'm like, no, let's do it. So we were on a mission to end all malaria deaths, but because of malnutrition, children under 5 were still passing away. So that's where I co-founded PB&J, Peanut Butter and Jesus, in 2012. And I landed there by myself to a factory that was rubble. Like literally nothing was there. We were promised a factory,
Gosh.
but there was nothing there.
Oh my
So,
gosh.
and in the flat that I lived in, there was no water, very minimal electricity. I lived with 3 wonderful German girls, but my role was to develop a peanut butter product and the establishment of a factory from inception to operation. And through strategic planning and implementation, I positioned PB&J as a supplier for esteemed organizations such as UNICEF and other entities so that they could facilitate widespread distribution across the country. And again, PB&J is peanut butter and Jesus. It wasn't just about feeding hungry bellies. It was about nourishing souls and sparking change. So yes, my journey in the heart of Africa started in the heart of Africa, but it's really taken me places that even I couldn't imagine. And I stepped away in 2016, and from 2016 to 2021, I worked in both small and large nonprofit teams in the human services, homelessness, and youth sectors. And like most people, because we all know it's the biggest joke, I've worn all the hats, I've done all the
Yep.
things. And, back to the Savvy Fundraiser and what I'm doing now, I now have 3 kids under 4, and so I decided to, while raising babies, decided to build and raise my own business. And so I stepped away from in-house work in 2022, to really utilize what I've learned over the years, the leadership strategies, the fundraising strategies. I've seen what works, what doesn't work. And so, from all of my experiences, to offer nonprofits a way to have more balance and engage their teams and retain their staff so that they can really deliver on their mission.
That's amazing. I love how it's like, okay, we're going to school for kinesiology. Just kidding. We are going to Malawi and we're going to start a nonprofit. Yeah, that's amazing. And I would imagine, like you were saying, wearing all the hats was, I'm sure, a bit of chaos, like while you were in it, and also was an opportunity to really hone in on what you really liked, what you were really skilled at, and what kind of came naturally to you. So, I mean, were you doing that, which then led, of course, to founding the Savvy Fundraiser and really focusing on the work that you do now? Were you sort of conscious of that as you were working with those different organizations, or was it just like, I'm just wearing all the hats and just trying to keep my head above water?
Yeah, that's a good question. So, yes, I definitely explored a lot of that. And even in my own business, like when I launched out in 2022, like I was doing all the things. I was like writing email campaigns, grant writing,
Mm,
doing events. And luckily, as an entrepreneur and an owner of my own business, like I get to say no to
mhm,
things that I really like want to focus on. And I found that, especially working with the nonprofits, my clients, that sometimes fundraising is just a band-aid beyond an issue that's actually there. Like,
mhm,
we write the grants, we ask someone for money, we ask people to attend an event, but then there's nothing. And so it's like we're
mhm.
working so hard to plan that event, which I'm not anti-events, I'm just more want to be more strategic about events.
Yes.
But it's like, what's the value? What are you trying to get out of it? And is it worth the money, or is it worth taking that time and investing in building individual donors and long-term supporters and ambassadors for your organization? So I just found myself overwhelmed with like all the tasks that I had to do. Nonprofits are overwhelmed and trying to say, oh, that organization is hosting an event, or they got that grant, like, let's go do that because it sounds like a
Mhm,
good idea, but then that creates conflict within the organization. People then get back to that overwhelm, and so that's where I think, I've really developed a solid fundraising strategy that it's adaptable, right? Like, we can add things to it, but it really helps people have a goal and allow people to see their important role in carrying out that goal from everyone in the organization, instead of just applying for like a $5,000 grant that requires more money than the actual $5,000, right? Like, let's be
mhm.
strategic on how we're approaching these opportunities and really have that data-driven decision and the ability to invite people into carrying out the goal with us.
Mhm. Yeah, oh my gosh, so much good stuff there. Yeah, talking about like shiny object syndrome, when you were talking about like, oh, we see this organization applying for that grant, we should do that too. Or we see this person over here doing this event, we should do one of those too. It's funny, I just recorded a solo podcast episode today all about like, what do nonprofits need to stop spending money on? And that was one thing. I'm like, stop spending money on activities that other people are doing that you think are going to work for you, but like they're actually not. Like, that's probably not the best use of your resources. And so I think that's huge. And you mentioned being able to say no as an entrepreneur, as a business owner. And I think that nonprofits maybe need to get a little bit better at saying no as well. Like, not all money makes sense for your organization, thinking about the $5,000 grant that costs way more than $5,000 to apply for and then manage and report on, et cetera. So I think all of that is so good. And so let's talk a little bit more about buy-in and, how to kind of get people on board so that as an organization, we're all in agreement, or at least if not agreement, like at least alignment when we're saying no to things, or we're not just chasing that next shiny object, because we're all on the same page about like what is our strategy, what direction are we going. So what have you seen work really well for organizations to get buy-in on fundraising strategy?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And, I think I utilize this framework called EMC Leadership Framework. I'm a train the trainer. It was founded by Dr. Lila Gershfeld, who I found amidst when I was in an organization with that shiny object syndrome and felt like the weight of the world on my shoulders. And so I think to your question, like there's a few areas of getting buy-in and belonging that I've seen nonprofits either do really well or struggle with.
Mhm,
One of them is internal clarity. So getting donor trust and confidence starts with internal clarity. And so everyone has to have a clear understanding of what the mission, the vision, and the values of the mission is. And if you can't get that clear on the inside, people don't have that buy-in and belonging and understanding of that vision and where you want to go. It's really difficult, especially as a fundraiser, to effectively convey this to donors. I remember walking into an organization and they were doing like five different things, and I share this story all the time. But I was confused, and like I would go talk with donors and they would be like, Haley, like, what do you actually do? Like, are you serving in Venezuela? Are you serving Native Americans? Are you serving local kids? Like, we're confused. And I'm like,
mm,
clearly I'm confused too. So that internal clarity and like sitting down our C-suite, I was the director of development at the time, but I sat down the C-suite and I was like, we have to get really clear on this messaging and how each person in our organization fits into that vision, because
mhm,
then that way I can go out and talk to donors and allow them to see themselves in that vision. But it
mhm,
starts with that internal clarity and getting those people within the organization, the staff, the volunteers, the board members to understand again, like how they can advocate on behalf of the mission. Um, so I'll stop there. And I probably have more to say about that, but I really think it starts with that internal clarity.
yeah, yeah, no, I think that's huge, and I that's really interesting because I've been talking to a client lately who's kind of exploring this process on like, well, what does our growth look like? Are we just going to do more of the same like indefinitely? And it because they're kind of in the same position where it's like, well, what are we communicating to donors? And some people are communicating one thing as to what our goals are, and other people are communicating something else. And so really making sure that everybody is on the same page, just like, what do we do? What is our vision? What's the direction that we're going? Because I think that over time, that sort of like disintegrates a little bit, and it's not really, it just it happens with time. So I think that that is huge. I think that's yeah, I think that's such a good point. If you want to say more, go for it.
Yeah, so I mean, when what you just said, like, is so important and it's so normal. And based on the EMC leadership process, which is based in attachment science, and I always like to talk about neuroscience before we get to like
Mm,
the practical strategies, but it says like when we're why the importance of buying and belonging is because it's like our basic needs, but above housing, food, and shelter and water.
mhm,
Like we need buying and belonging, and attachment says when we work together, we build a bond, and emotions are the bond that hold that together. So specifically with like your organization that you were talking about, or the one that I was talking about, when people don't see how they're a part of that vision, they become emotionally disconnected, and then conflict starts happening because they don't have that sense of buy-in and belonging. And conflict is never about content, it's about emotional disconnection. It's about, how do I play an important role in your vision or in your life? Like, I want to
mhm.
know that I matter to you and the work that we're doing is important. And so it's really important for organizations, and like within the EMC leadership framework, we go through a reconnection forum to help people really see how, like, when we lose each other, we're talking in the same circles, we're talking about the same thing, but we, like, lose that aspect of you care for me. And so
Mhm.
it's really important to get that back and have this conversation of, oh, you see me, we share the same fears, we share the same reality. We just lost each other along the way. And we say, like, it's always a negative cycle. There's no blame person. It's just like how our brain is wired to react.
Mhm. Mhm.
Um, but when you get that sense of buy-in and belonging, people are more likely to collaborate and like they're more likely to communicate and take risks and innovate and grow and see how working together gets them towards that common goal, that common vision. And again, then it comes back to you feel more confident inviting people into your mission. You feel more confident knowing how your role plays in fundraising, especially on like the board level, staff level. Like you're more willing to be an ambassador on behalf of the organization because you feel that connectedness. You know how important you are to each other. You get buy-in in that vision and you're like, let's go preach it from the mountaintops, right? Like, let's invite
Mhm.
people in. This is an exciting opportunity for people to realize their generosity, and our organization is a tool in which we can do that.
Mm, that's so interesting, and I love the connection to neuroscience. That's so cool. I would imagine that I mean, I think we know this. Most nonprofit leaders are like super busy and we're just flying through every single day, just getting everything that needs to get done. And I would imagine that it takes a little bit of slowing down to get this buy-in and to help give people a sense of belonging. And so what would you say to that person that's like, I do not have time to slow down and get or to get people's buy-in and to make them feel like they belong. I mean, I love what you said, like the results that are going to come from that. I think that's huge. But yeah, what would you say to yeah, to those organizations or those leaders that are like, this sounds like a lot of work and a lot of time?
That's a good question. Um, I would say it's a strategic imperative. Like, it's not just a feel-good idea of, like, making space for people to voice their opinions, voice their needs, voice their fears. You have to, because our shared friend Tucker Wanamaker was on my podcast, and we were talking about this idea of like if you do strategy first, you're not going to get the buy-in belonging. You're not going to get people who are going to. They might execute it, but they won't execute it well. Like you have to
Mhm.
start with buy-in and belonging. It's a strategic imperative. And I was just recording a solo episode on my own podcast. And for a challenge that I'm doing, and it was like embracing solitude. Like you have like I get it. Like there's fear in the nonprofit that if you don't keep going, it's also how we're wired in times of stress. Like we want to be busy, we want to add more, but you have to create space in your schedule. Whether it's for
Mhm.
you to embrace solitude and that's just to take a breath. It doesn't even have to be a full hour in your schedule a week. Like maybe 5, 10, 30 minutes. Maybe go for a walk. But it allows you to get that clarity. It allows you to refocus and kind of get your head out of the work that you're doing because we all get
Mhm.
stuck in it, right? And we have to solve that problem that's ahead of us. We have to do this. But there isn't anything we have to do. What we should
Mhm.
do is
Mhm.
embrace that solitude, embrace that space, make that space for safe conversations because it's a strategic imperative. It just I feel like it's a non-negotiable. You have to. And again, there's just the your team will become higher performing and you'll see more results as from making that space.
Mhm, mhm. I totally agree, and I just think about my own company, and we're moving so quickly all the time. And one thing I learned recently that I think is really similar to what you're talking about is we just got back at the time of this recording from our annual team retreat. It was last week, and we spent a couple hours. Like I basically went through my like state of the business and I shared all about like our 2023 results, what went really well, what didn't go so well, what's our vision for next year, where are we going? And I got a lot of feedback from the team that like they loved that and appreciated it so much and that they want to hear more of it. And so I'm always like, number one, like we don't really have time for that. And our team meeting agenda is like, nobody wants to hear this. But I do think that it's so important. And I mean, I just witnessed it and with my own organization of people, telling me how valuable that was. And so just applying that to nonprofits as well, it really is important to take the time and space. And I know that our team now feels so much more bought into like, oh, I understand my role in this big picture now. Whereas before, they're just like, wait, what are we, where are we going here? Where are we going as an organization? So yeah, I think that advice is so valuable. I love that. So okay, so the work that you are doing with organizations now, um, you're focused on individual fundraising.
Yes.
Okay, gotcha. And so when should an organization think about like sort of upping their individual fundraising game?
That's a great question. So, a lot of the organizations that I talk to, they're exhausted, they're burnt out, they're like chasing, like I said before, like chasing the grant, but maybe that grant contract has ended, or you have to take space after 3 years because like the contract is ending and then you can apply. So, like in that third year, how are you going to make up that $20,000? Also, you're seeing that your community is less and less showing up for events. I feel like after the pandemic, the last couple years, yes, some people like going to in-person events. I think before that, some of them were dying away in terms of like showing up. And so I think you have to really look at like that bottom line and understand, like, do you have the staffing capacity and resources to carry out all of these events? Do you have the actual resources, like not just budget, but like partnerships and volunteers? And is it really logical or budget wise for you to carry it on? And at the end of the day, like a lot of these things, we don't account for staff time, right? Especially in the
Mhm,
budget. And so, is it really realistic, or would your time be better spent um focusing on those individuals and building out long-term supporters? You have people in your database, you've been around for a while, you've had board members, you've had those events, you've had volunteers. And so what if you strategically started investing your time in those people, so that no matter what grant contract might end, like, that you'll be able to have that sustainability through those seasons.
mhm. I love that. So do you do like a monthly giving program? Is that part of the work that you do to get sort of like essentially recurring revenue or not necessarily?
Not necessarily. That's not really my strong house. I know like Dana Snyder has a great
Yes.
monthly giving program. I know that's her wheelhouse. I focus more on annual giving. So,
Mm,
like nonprofits, yes, they've had a few major gifts sprinkled here and there, but like really building that strong supporter base so that they can then build a major gift program, or um, things like that. Or maybe they've had, I was interviewing for a nonprofit a few weeks ago, and they've had a bunch of people who have now set wills and bequests, right? Like, let's
mm,
set that. And they had solid donors, and then they're like, well, we're not in their wills. And I'm like, but it starts with that annual giving. Um,
mhm.
and really building that solid foundation of supporters so that you can invite them in a more meaningful way.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point, right? If somebody has not given to you ever before or you haven't really built that relationship with them, what makes you think that you're going to be in their will? I mean, like think about that in the human world, right? Like, oh, you're just sort of like tangentially acquainted with someone. What would make you think that you would possibly be in their will when they die? So yeah, that's a really good point. And so what ways can organizations like build relationships with their individual donors if they're like, yeah, I think we need to, we really need to focus on this just to diversify our revenue a little bit more. Where's a good place to start?
I would say identifying like the top 50 to maybe 75 people that have given to you over the last 2 to 3 years. Um, and start communicating with them. I would say probably
Mhm.
the top 20, at least like send a personalized email or a phone call and just start communicating and invite them
Mhm.
in. And it doesn't even have to be a conversation where you're asking for money. At this point, it probably isn't.
Yeah.
It's just a like impact for a lack of a better word, but like asking them, being like, hey, we're going on this vision. This is where we want to carry out our vision, whether it's for a fundraising program, and getting external stakeholder buy-in and belonging and getting their advice. And I always say this, like, I don't know what the quote is, but it's like, if you ask for advice, you'll get money. But it's like, you
Oh, I
really
like
want,
that.
if you ask for money, you'll get advice. If you ask for advice, you'll
Yeah.
get money. I think
Oh,
that's the
that's
quote.
good. Yeah.
Um, but yeah, just start reaching out. I know that it is scary. I know that it is hard, but simply saying, "Hey, I know that you have been involved in our organization for X amount of years. Like, I would love to get to know more about you and what started your journey with us. Like, how did you get involved? Where do your passions lie? Like, what fires you up? What gets you up in the morning?" And
Mhm.
I would also love to share, as your guide for this organization, this is where we're going, and I would love to get your advice or get your feedback on where we're going. And so I think just reaching out, and then, I'm not into email newsletters, but, for the other 50 to 75, start emailing them impact stories. Do you have a story that you can't get off your mind? Do you have a story? And so start communicating, inviting them to events, inviting them to volunteer and be engaged in a more meaningful way. But it starts with
Mhm.
that first email or that first phone call. And once you start making those, I know that that first phone call, that first email is so hard. But once you push send, you get that little bit of confidence, you get that little bit of
Yes.
hope, and you get that momentum that you're looking for.
Yes. Oh my gosh. That's so good. And I think, like, even backing up to your point earlier about, like, we need to all be on the same page about where this organization is going so that when you do go out and communicate externally, like, you're communicating the same message and everyone's on board. So I love that that all sort of ties together really nicely. I love that. I feel like yeah, making that first phone call is definitely like nerve-wracking, but I think your advice to, okay, we're not going in and asking them for like $100,000. We're just giving an update, telling what we're doing, what our vision is, and if I love the advice, asking them for advice. I think that's so good. That's so good. So you have a fundraising course for nonprofits to, I would assume, sort of learn your fundraising strategy. So tell us a little bit more about your course, what it entails, who it's for, all the things.
Yeah, that's great. And thank you so much for asking that question. So, yeah, it's for emerging nonprofits. So, it's for these people who want to, start a fundraising course, but they can't necessarily maybe afford a consultant like myself. Um, and so they need to learn step by step how to lay the framework, how to lay the foundation for a successful fundraising program. And so the first piece, the first kind of module is really about building this culture of connection and understanding the
Mhm.
attachment science and how to get that buy-in and belonging. And we talk a lot about emotions and how emotions are powerful and how they
Mm.
help you manage in, out, and up. And so that you can really successfully fundraise. And then we obviously talk about my four-step framework of um, it's discover, dream, design, and destiny. So that's my four-part fundraising strategy, where the discover part is really going into, I guess, prospect research, like who's in your database, doing some deep dives into your data, understanding who's there, understanding what's worked well, what hasn't, and identifying
Mm.
people who are in your database. Because, I think I haven't said this yet, but like acquiring new donors, and a lot of board members are like, go find new people. Like,
Mhm.
it's expensive to acquire new people, and if you I've just posted this on my LinkedIn. I was like, "How on earth are you gonna bring in new people if you can't even maintain the people that are already in your database?"
Yes. Yes,
So, like,
that.
let's focus on that well. Invite, is the next piece. Like, let's invite people in a more meaningful way, and then, let's ask them to invest. Like, how do they invest
Mm.
in your
Mhm.
organization? And then we also talk about board engagement because we all know that's a pain point. And there, I
Yes.
feel like from my work that I've done, like I've successfully seen boards engaged in fundraising and like getting excited. So we go through how to engage, educate, and encourage them to be a part of the organization in terms of fundraising. And then
Mhm.
there's also mindfulness practices that are kind of interspersed throughout it so that it goes back to creating that time for solitude, that time for inner introspection, I should say, which I know is scary if you're just starting
Yes.
out on it. But in those moments of silence is where you get the most clarity, where you get the most focus. It's always like I read something
Mhm.
from James Clear today. It was like
Mm.
it when you're in the shower, like, you get the most thoughts
Yes.
that come to you, and it's not that you need to take more showers throughout the day, it's that you have to create more space for thinking, right? And
Yes.
even in
Yes.
introspection and mindfulness, like, your brain's not you're supposed to be quiet, but, like, that's where your thinking comes, and you just gotta run with it, right? So
Mhm.
that kind of is all intertwined into when you're starting a fundraising program, like, it is overwhelming, and fundraising in nonprofits is overwhelming, so you have to create that space, and by doing so, you know, I should have started with this, but I always say fundraising is an inside job, so that's, like, kind of where that to c wrap it all up, is how I've framed that course is building that culture of connection, inviting people into the mission, doing that mindfulness, because it starts with you, it starts within your organization so that you can fundraise successfully and invite people in.
Mhm. Oh, that's also good. And I really, what I don't see, I think, talked about often enough is the mindfulness piece. And actually, the last two business coaches that I have worked with for myself, both schedule thinking time. Like they have thinking time blocks on their calendar. And I'm like, how do they do that? Like, that's awesome. And I need to do more of that, I think. But I think, especially nonprofit leaders, we're not scheduling thinking time into our calendar. Are you kidding me? Just like having empty time that you don't fill with meetings and you don't fill with emails to be able to create that space for yourself, I think is so important because you're right. That's where all the clarity comes. And so I love that you've included that. In your course because I just think we just don't do enough of that. We just don't have enough white space in our calendars, in our schedules to be able to think. So that's amazing. If people want to learn more about your course, is it always open, or are you doing like launch periods, or how do they find out more?
You can go to the savvyfundraiser.com/course, I think it is, and I'm sure it'll be linked in the show notes. But yeah, it's open. So
Awesome.
hit and roll. And throughout the course, you'll also get like a coaching call with me. So as you're going through the course, or you just need to get something off your mind, or like brainstorm, just brain dump. I'm here to be your guide on the side and help support you through this journey.
Awesome. Oh, that's amazing. Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for sharing. Okay, so we have savvyfundraiser.com, and then yeah, you can navigate to the course. We'll have the exact link in the show notes. Let's see. Oh my gosh, I almost forgot the most important question. I was gonna say any like closing remarks, but I have a question for you. What does a prosperous nonprofit look like to you?
Yeah, I love this question and I love how everyone answers it on your podcast. But specifically for me, and to kind of like wrap up this whole conversation, a prosperous nonprofit is one where there's a strong sense of community and collaboration among its team members. Everyone understands their role in fundraising and recognizes the importance of their contributions to each other and the fundraising success. And the environment fosters innovation and growth, where everyone feels like they can show up as their whole best self.
That's so good. I love it. Everyone's answer is my favorite. And yeah, like you said, everyone answers so differently. It's just so fun to hear. And pretty much nobody is like, it means you have a lot of money in the bank. Like that is not all that prosperity is about. So I love that. Thank you so much for sharing. Okay, now I will wrap us up. Where, aside from the course, where can our listeners learn more about you? Definitely need to check out your podcast. But yeah, tell us all the things and we'll make sure to include everything in the show notes too.
Yeah, thanks. I mainly hang out on LinkedIn. You can find me at Haley Cooper, CFRE. Stephanie will be on my podcast too, Lead with Heart. We talk about nonprofit leadership. And then yeah, feel free to email me at thesavvyfundraiser@gmail.com. Every month I have brewing connections and conversations for about 5 to 7 people. So book a call. It can be any kind of brew that you like.
Love
I
it.
love coffee, but tea, beer, whatever it is to you, depending on the time of day. Let's book a call, and these are like just no agenda calls. It's just to get to know each other and just see how we can support each other, commiserate, all the good things. So feel free to book a call.
Oh, that's awesome. How fun. I love that you've sort of built that little community. That's fantastic. Awesome. Well, Haley, thank you so much for chatting with me and dropping all the fundraising gems. We'll link to everything in the show notes. And yeah, just really appreciate you. Thanks.
Thank you, Stephanie. It's been such a joy.